Hi everyone, Falgun Patel here with Certus Cybersecurity. Welcome to the latest edition of our Application Security Insights series. This video will focus on an application security vulnerability known as Blind Server-Side Request Forgery or Blind SSRF. Blind SSRF is an impactful vulnerability because in certain circumstances, it can be exploited to achieve remote code execution. We will talk about how to identify blind SSRF and talk about how to mitigate against blind SSRF. To get started, I want to give you a quick rundown of what SSRF is. Server-side request forgery (SSRF) is where an adversary can abuse client-side functionalities to either read the internal resources of the application server or try to move laterally within an organization's network. There are three main types of SSRF: blind SSRF, partial SSRF, and full SSRF. Today, we'll focus primarily on blind SSRF, which is slightly different from partial SSRF and full SSRF. With blind SSRF, an adversary communicates with a vulnerable application and does not get a response back from the application server. Consequently, the attacker does not know whether the payload was executed or not. In this scenario, the attacker can host their own command and control center known as C2 to validate if the target executed the payload. An attacker can then build on this access to have a persistent connection to the server. The purpose of performing this attack is primarily to gather more information about the server itself, such as metadata, confidential or sensitive files. During an engagement for a large enterprise client, we encountered an innocuous image upload functionality. The good thing is that the organization had whitelisting in place. This whitelisting only allowed the upload of three main image types, namely JPEG, PNG, and SVG. In this scenario, they were also looking at the metadata of the image files to ensure that the file type was one of the three whitelisted image types. However, for SVG, there is an attribute called xlink href that will allow you to link files. Ideally, this attribute should be restricted to only allow the linking of internal files and resources. In this case, it was possible to link external resources and send information outbound. Next, we attempted to identify compatible URI schemes to interact with our command and control center, which is an external resource, using different protocols such as Gopher, SSH, rather than common protocols like HTTP and HTTPS. In this blind SSRF scenario, successful payload execution does not result in a response body from the application server. However, our C2, Command and Control Center, did receive communication back from the application server. This meant that we were able to successfully trick the application server into interacting with external resources over different protocols. From an adversary's perspective, the next logical step would be to create a persistent remote shell on the server so that the attacker can access the application server at will. If there are no proper OS protections in place, the attacker can do just about anything on the server and has successfully owned the box. So now, the most important thing about SSRF is how you can protect yourself and your organization. We partially visited mitigation earlier when we talked about internal servers being air-gapped from the wider internet. We do understand that there would be certain circumstances where the proxy servers need to talk to external hosts. In these circumstances, a whitelist should be implemented to only allow external IP addresses or domains. If your business use case needs to be able to reach out to the wider internet, the code running on the server should be able to identify IP addresses, whether they be v4 or v6, or domains that do not map to internal resources prior to making a request to the target resource. Moving on and coming back to one of the core principles in application security, validating input. Validate input only to allow supported URI schemes. This should be defined by the organization's use case. This will prevent the usage of unused URI schemes like Gopher and SSH. Validating input always to not allow resolution of internal domains unless specifically required can also help in the mitigation. These added layers of protection will help your organization mitigate blind SSRF risks. And that's all for our video today on blind SSRF. Thank you for watching. Comment down below on what type of attacks or topics you would like us to cover next.